Hey friends, Jill here. Welcome back to the farm. Today I'm in the kitchen, which I had kind of, told you guys a lot of the content you're going to see from me for the next week or so. It's probably going to be a large amount done inside just because I'm limited on what I can do outside. But I'm actually making homemade pasta for dinner. Nathan and I took the girls to a cooking class probably a month ago, and we learned how to make homemade pasta, and we were so impressed at how easy it was. It was literally flour and eggs, and we were like, there's no way this is all you need to make pasta. So my friend let me borrow his pasta machine, and it just kind of like sits on the counter, so I'll show you guys all of that. But I thought, well, you know what, if we can just make pasta with flour and eggs, surely I can make pasta with sourdough, and then it could have, some health benefits in there, some fermentation. And sure enough, you actually can, and it's so simple. So you only need 3 ingredients to make this: flour, eggs, and sourdough discard. So I fed my sourdough starter this morning, and you can see it is nice and active. So you'll need a cup of sourdough discard. I've got 4 eggs, and then it called for bread flour, so I just used the King Author's unbleached organic bread flour, and I think I'm doing like 3 cups of this. So essentially what you do is you're gonna like pile up all the flour, make kind of like a little swell, if you will. You're gonna crack the eggs in there, and then we're gonna add the sourdough in there. Now the cool thing about this recipe is if you're in a pinch, you can actually, whip all these ingredients together and let it sit for like 10 or 15 minutes. But if you're really wanting that fermentation process that happens through those bulk fermenting, when it has all that time to kind of break everything down, allows the fermentation to take place, that's really when you're reaping a lot of those health benefits from the sourdough. So it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm gonna actually start this process now and then let the dough sit for a couple hours before dinner. That way I can just kind of play around. I am gonna make this again and cut that fermentation down to about an hour. And then I'll probably make it again and just do what the recipe called for, which was that 10 or 15 minutes, and really see if we can taste the difference in the different fermenting times, and also if it changes the texture of the pasta. So a lot of times you'll hear in sourdough like over fermenting or under fermenting, and a lot of times they know this because, one, the structure of your sourdough will completely change. So if you let it over ferment, it'll rise, then it has nothing to feed off of anymore, so then it starts to collapse. And then your dough, if you have really dense dough or really holy dough, like little mouse bites in there, that's always usually a good indication of something in that bulk fermentation process, and really just kind of nailing that down. And the good thing is too, is with making homemade pasta, if you have an abundance of eggs, and if say you don't want to do it with the sourdough discard, you just want to do the flour and the eggs, you can kind of have that liberty to mess up a few times and just try to remake it, because you're not just using a ton of ingredients, So let's get started. I'm excited. So I'm just going to pile all the flour here on the counter. First, I'm going to clean the counter, so make sure you're working with a clean surface. All right, that got a little tricky. Now I'm gonna add the sourdough starter. So at our cooking class, she said for a serving, so like to make a batch. So let's see, Nathan and I doubled this for the 2 of us, but then each kid, so Charlie made 1 cup of flour with 2 eggs. Nathan and I did 2 cups of flour with 4 eggs, and that was plenty. So I'm also just gonna, that was kind of messy a little, so I'm just gonna go ahead and add the sourdough starter right now and then just mix it all together because it is gonna get really messy. And I'm gonna go ahead and take flour and just kind of toss it on the sides here just so it's easier to scrape up some of this excess egg. And then the cool thing is too, is if you do notice that it's like not liquidy enough, I'm probably just gonna either add more sourdough starter or maybe just throw in a couple tablespoons of water.
So right now, the dough, you think, oh, there's no way this is gonna turn into dough. I mean, it's just, there's such a flour base. I prefer to do everything by hand, partially because I don't have any sort of mixer that has like a dough hook in it or whatever. And truthfully, even if I did, I really prefer to hand knead. So this says you'll need to hand knead for like 10 to 12 minutes. And so I'm gonna continue to do this. I do have like a good kind of movement going on. I kind of take the palm of my hand and rotate it down. But I will tell you, a lot like butter. If you've ever made handmade butter, you're like, oh my gosh, this is never gonna turn into butter. Just keep working it. It will eventually turn. And like I said, after, you know, probably, I don't know, 5 to 7 minutes, if I think I need to add a little bit of water, I will, but you'd be surprised, it will turn into dough. So I get asked a lot, you know, how do I start growing food? How do I start homesteading? I live in the suburbs, or I received an email this week from a lady who lives in a townhouse and just really wants to start this homesteading journey, but she really has no idea to, you know, where to begin. And honestly, a lot of people feel limited just because they don't have land or whatever it might be. This is a great way to start, you guys. You know, buy some eggs, you know, from a local person, maybe the farm down the road, maybe your friend, maybe you do just have, you know, a small little backyard, suburban backyard, but you do have chickens. Make your own pastas, make your own sourdough bread. You don't have to have any amount of land to be able to do that. You can go to the farmer's market and you can buy tomatoes and can them. You don't have to have the space to grow them, and don't let that limit you, because this is such a you know, a sweet opportunity to really kind of hone in your craft and your skill before you have to learn another craft and skill of growing food and troubleshooting growing those food and trellising and pests. And so for me, I remember the first house Nathan and I lived in. Oh, it was cute, y'all. It was this little log cabin close to town, and eventually I ended up having a few raised beds there. But before that, you know, Charlie was a baby. I was pregnant in that house, and I remember going to the farmer's market, and I would buy from those local farmers, but I would buy cucumbers, and I was coming home and learning how to can pickles, you know, and I was buying okra and making pickled okra, and I was making bread, but I didn't actually know about sourdough at that point, so I was making these whole wheat loaves, and I actually ended up selling those with honey butters. I would make a lot of herbal teas, and so I was really into herbal medicine then, and still am. And so I was experimenting with a lot of that. I was making a lot of herbal medicine and tinctures and stuff like that. And so, you know, really utilize this time to just be learning a skill and a craft. And that way, whenever you are adding on that next chapter of growing your own food, or maybe growing your own herbs or raising your own animals, you'll feel really, you know, equipped in that skill to learn how to process it, or, you know, learning how to make pasta from scratch, or sourdough from scratch, or canning, or whatever it may be. It always is so sad to me when I hear people and they think they're limited because they don't have X, Y, or Z. And for me, that's really kind of a sweet opportunity to kind of go outside of the norm, right? If someone tells me I can't do something, I'm just like, watch. Bet. Yes, I can. And so it's just kind of this cool opportunity when people think, oh, you have to have, you know, all this land to be sustainable, or you have to have this to be able to have everything homemade from scratch. That's not true. You have to have a willing attitude, and you have to be willing to learn how to do something. And not only you have to be willing to learn how to do it, you have to be willing to learn to fail at it and come back and try it again. And so that was the thing. There were a lot of cucumbers I had to throw out that didn't quite taste like pickles, if you know what I mean. But I didn't stop. I kept learning, and I kept growing as I was trying to hone in that craft. And now, you know, we don't even can pickles. Now we ferment them. But that was a cool skill because now I can teach somebody else if they want to know it. And it's just another thing I can add to my tool belt. So now's the time, you guys. Don't be limited by your lack of space or whatever. Really just kind of hone into what you can do and what you can learn. And I think you'd be surprised just like the better mindset it puts you into when you start thinking about what you do have the ability to do versus what you're limited and can't do. All right, so the other day I did a sourdough video, told you guys I would link all the information to our sourdough starter and our course, and I totally forgot to. So this time I'm gonna remember, it's gonna be down there. But now that I have it in a bowl, it's all good and incorporated, kneaded really well. I'm just gonna pop this in a bowl, put a damp towel over it. I'm just gonna leave it at room temperature. And this is where I'm gonna leave it for a couple hours. But I think minimum, even if you wanted to make pasta quickly, probably leave it on the counter for, you know, 15, 20, 30 minutes if you can, and then we'll come back and we will make pasta here in a little while. In the meantime, if you are using the sourdough discard, you want to make sure that you're refeeding this before you put it back in the fridge. That way it has something to feed off of. So I do 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water. Alright guys, so I have let my dough kind of ferment for the last few hours. You guys can see here I've got the pasta maker clamped down to my table. Now this is really cool because you just kind of take this crank and you put it in here, and this is where you'll roll your dough out, and then there's two different settings for your pasta, whether you want just like your regular thin spaghetti or a fettuccine. So this is really cool. You can clamp it onto your counter or the table. I thought just for the sake of like trying to show you guys what I'm doing, I would clamp it onto the table. Now I will say, anytime I'm in the kitchen, I'm like ridiculously messy, like unapologetically messy. It drives Nathan bananas. So this, you're gonna spread flour out, and you need to be really, really liberal. Like this was something that when we took our cooking class, she mentioned a lot. Like you don't ever want your pasta to get dry. If it's sticking together or sticking to the surface that you're working with, just add more flour. So I am going to add a generous amount of flour now, and then I'm actually going to take my pasta and I'm going to divide it up into sections. That way I can, this is a pretty small machine. Even if you're working with like a KitchenAid attachment, which is what we did in our cooking class, we still had to break it up into smaller pieces. So my dough did expand a bit. Gosh. Get it out. So now I'm just going to take it, divide it into these pieces. All right, so now what I'm going to do is kind of knead it into, so I got some flour on either side here. Just gonna kind of make it into this thinner shape before you run it through your machine. So I'm just taking the palm of my hand . So I know if you're using a pasta machine like this or a KitchenAid, it's going to be a bit different because we used a KitchenAid when we were doing our cooking lessons, and this is obviously a pasta machine. So on this, there's a little knob on the side and it goes 7 down, and that was very similar to the KitchenAid. But with the KitchenAid, we started at 1 and worked our way through 7, and we ran it through twice before moving to the next setting. With this, you are starting at 7 and working your way down. So we are going to give it a go. This is the first time I'm using a machine like this, so truthfully I really have no idea what I'm doing. So we're just gonna learn together.
All right, so that actually turned out really well. And so now what you'll do is just go ahead and figure out your setting you want to run it through. I am gonna grab a sheet of parchment paper just so when I get these, you know, clumps of pasta, I can just kind of have them set up and then I can transfer it over to the stove easily. All right, just like that, we have made pasta. Yo, how stinking cool is this? So I'm gonna separate this some. Some of these kind of got stuck together a little, so just pulling them apart. I'm gonna make a pile over here and then I'm just gonna throw some flour on it just to keep them from sticking together. But oh my gosh, this is so much fun. All right, so I've got one serving done and a few more to go. I really was hoping to kind of make extra so we could freeze dry this to see how it did, because I thought if we had an excess of eggs in the summertime, I could make a bunch of pasta ahead of time and freeze dry it. So I really want to kind of figure out that. That's always something I'm thinking about too, is how do I preserve things? And I don't know, I just think that might be kind of fun to experiment with. All right, Mama's gonna help you. Look, I'm gonna run it through. And then you're gonna take it and do that, okay?
No, I want to do that.
All right, now crank it. Take the crank. Good job, go, go, go. Keep on going. Go, go, go. Yay, keep going, keep going. Yay, Junie made pasta.
I want to do it by myself.
You want to do it by yourself? Well, hang on.
Good. This.
Tell them what you're making, June.
I'm making pasta.
What kind of pasta?
I don't know.
You don't know, okay. All right, you excited for dinner?
I am excited for dinner.
So Nathan is chopping up some mushrooms and onion. You're actually gonna eat pork with this, right?
I'll cook me a pork chop.
Yeah. So that made a bunch. So my plan was to cook some of the pasta plain and then freeze dry it to have quick noodles.
I didn't know you were filming. It sounds great.
Do you think that'll work?
I don't know.
Because then how cool would that be to have freeze dried sourdough noodles? And I mean, it made so many, gosh, like that 3 cups you guys made. I mean, if this is like a serving, depending on, you know, the person eating, that's a lot of pasta right there. Alright guys, I threw the pasta in there. I'm just letting it boil for about 3 or 4 minutes. It doesn't take very long for it to get done. And then we'll just mix it all together. Alright, here we have the finished product. Alright guys, we are about to enjoy dinner. You do have to think about this a bit ahead of time. However, it tastes so good and so fantastic, and really it's just a good way to use up eggs. If you're wanting to explore different things to do with your sourdough discard, obviously this is more nutrient dense than just like going and buying a box of pasta. So I hope you guys enjoyed this fun little recipe. Sourdough discard, eggs, and flour. 3 simple things to make our delicious meal. But thanks for hanging out with me. I'll talk to you soon.